Hello, everybody, and welcome to another conversation in our series on why Black Lives Matter. Today, we are going to delve quite a bit more into the core of racial separation and look at what that feeling is in order to heal it. So last week, the team agreed that we felt that it was time to go into our healing at a deeper level. But in order to go into that healing at a deeper level, we kind of need to really go deeply into the actual feeling attached to this concept of racial separation and what is underlying it. So we ended up with deciding on the topic of healing the core of racial separation. So I think one of the things that I've just been feeling into in this week is what is that feeling that I have when I consider that there is no, that I don't have the sense of cohesion and as much community across races as there is within races. So I want us to start there in terms of just exploring what that cohesion or cohesiveness across races is and is not, and what feeling that brings up for all of us, and see if there's a piece of healing for us just in that component before we go into deeper components. So I'm gonna open it up to the team, and just like my feeling was that I just feel like there is this energy that we kind of need to keep ourselves separate from each other, as opposed to fully desiring the cohesion. So that's something that kind of cropped up for me, that I've kind of been feeling into. And I just want to kind of check with everybody else. How does that sit with you when I mention something like that?
Yeah, I wonder if it kind of has to do with like feeling like we maybe don't understand different races, or being gravitated towards your own race because you look similar, and so just kind of assuming that you have more to relate to with each other in that sense. And like maybe feeling, I don't know, like I feel like it definitely starts at childhood, right? Like as children, we don't really see anything different, or it's not really a big deal. We're kind of taught to see it as a big deal. And so I'm wondering if that has something to do with it. And like maybe there's this belief that because we're not the same color, or we're not the same race, that we can't really relate, which is a lie. But, you know, I'm wondering if that has something to do with it.
I have to agree with you. I think when growing up, but one of the things that I kind of realized, and it wasn't that I realized it at the time, but like looking back into it, it was the energy of distrust of the other. There's a lot of like my family was very distrusting of other race groups, and they may not have specifically said it, but it showed up in their behavior. It showed up in the people that were allowed to be around us, and the people that we were allowed to be around. That's one of the things that I kind of like in this week just like kind of cropped up. It's like that was an awareness that came forward. It's just like how it was the dynamic of socialization and growing up in a specific type of socialization, as opposed to the freedom to socialize across the board.
what came up for me is that I actually agree with what you said earlier of how the separation can in a way look as can feel as a good thing, only because I feel there are some people in the world who can kind of be considered as know-it-alls, where they don't where I think that they're so comfortable in their own specific mindset and world that they don't realize the other worlds outside of theirs. And when it comes to things like race, and you hear people say these really asinine things, it's like, wait, have you walked in my footsteps? Have you experienced things that I've experienced? Like, how can you say things from an outside perspective that you don't really have any experience in? Things like that. So that also comes with acknowledging and educating yourself and not being so like tunnel vision on what you know and what you can talk about. That's what came up with me.
I think that you touched on something, that kind of anger that comes with not having the same experience of reality. And I say to go even further that there's that painful feeling that it's by nature impossible to ever be on the same level as a person from another color or ever relate. I'd say it's painful because like when we were talking, introducing the topic, what I felt was like feeling into my union because it's interracial. And there was like this feeling that no matter what we do, there will always be that wall of separation between us because we're not the same color. And yeah, that's what's being brought up for me.
Yeah, like when I look, just feeling into it, it's like, it's almost this feeling of being able to relate to other people of other race groups to a certain point. And then it's kind of almost like this, whether it's a wall or a barrier or whatever, there's only room to move to a certain point and kind of not past it. Whereas if I looked into like within the race group, there's a greater openness to going further than that line in terms of getting to know people, kind of socializing with people. But it's also that energy of similarity, like there's no requirement to explain why certain things are the way they are. So there's the greatest sense of just like comfort and relaxation in those spaces because of the sameness or similarities. Where and it's kind of almost that gives me the idea that it's this almost false sense of security created in the sameness or the similarity, which then by association means there could be a sense of insecurity because within the difference.
Right, I think it's definitely an illusion because then you relate with someone on the things that you have experienced, and so sometimes it's painful situation. And on the other end, you might have more similarities with, for example, me a Caucasian European person than an Ethiopian Black person, you know? So yeah, there's definitely that illusion that you're safer inside the community, like with like color, skin color as a common thing.
Yeah, I just want to kind of check in with Drake and Anastasia. What does this bring up for you? Like what does it what's the thought that comes up for you when you kind of consider all these things?
Well, one thing is that like we keep saying like, oh, well, we're the same, or there's differences, or blah blah blah. And it just kind of like clicked that like it's a lie that, you know, we're different to begin with. Like because, you know, in truth, God made us all and we're all God's children. So like yeah, and then like the other thing was like just like this level of deep unconditional acceptance. Like if we accept ourselves, that would like change a lot. And like I love that you called me and Drake because I was actually thinking like about how like, you know, like I do relate to you and also like Drake and like everyone here, because like obviously I'm mixed, so like I've experienced racism in tons of different ways, but then like I'm also like light skinned, as they would say, and so like there like I experienced that too, and then, you know, like Drake probably relates to us too, because in his own way, like because Ray, you know, like I see how he constantly has to like tell people like, oh, I'm a he, like stop calling me she. So like I'm like interested on like Drake's perspective too on like how he relates, because that's like in a way kind of racism, you know. It's like what Deji was saying, like people like have this tunnel vision and like don't understand things. So that comes up a lot for us as well. Yeah, so yeah. What do you have to say, Drake?
I mean, yeah, I do agree with you. I feel like Granville was talking about like trust or mistrust, and I feel like that plays a big part in like the relationship of like feeling you're getting closer with somebody. Sorry, somebody just called me and hung up. Oh my goodness, what was that? That was weird. It was a FaceTime. Yeah, it is. I think it is about that. I think it's about like there's a mistrust or maybe a feeling like I feel unsafe in this relationship because maybe you feel like the other person doesn't understand you and like what you've been through. You know, like I can relate to, you know, being friends with somebody and I'm like, oh, well, what if something happens, or what if they say like the wrong thing and then I get triggered and then they find out, right? Like what if they hurt me? That's just what comes up for me, but I feel like it also relates to you guys too. Like maybe you are like, oh, well, what if they say something, or what if they like comment about my skin color and try to hurt me? Like maybe that comes up for you guys too, but that's just what I'm feeling. So I don't know if anyone can relate to that.
Yeah, I think like when you say it, it definitely strikes a chord in the sense of not being clear with how that communication and that interaction will actually play out. And one of the things that I've kind of been working through with my coach is that because of the fact that I wasn't necessarily trusting life in and of itself, I was putting up barriers to people getting closer. And I feel like that's one of the things that's kind of in the same, that like in this space, it's very similar. It's erecting those barriers that give the illusion of safety. Like it's like almost like the safety is attached to something. It's attached to a barrier. It's attached to keeping people at arm's length. It's attached to not letting people in. And I feel like that starts to highlight to me like where there's actually in me this like fueling the separation as opposed to trying to heal the separation. Like those kind of things for me just sounds like a lot of fueling the separation. Like, and I think one of the thought process that came to me today in my coaching session was kind of where there's that invisible line that you draw that you don't allow yourself to go past. And then you start to heal, and so that line kind of perforates and perforates and perforates until it actually allows for flow. And I feel like that's where the healing sits, is in allowing the flow as opposed to restricting the movement, restricting the interaction, not being open completely to the interaction. Because I feel like having grown up, seeing certain things and almost mimicking the behavior of the people that I was learning from at the time, I didn't allow myself to experience almost the full ambit of life, the full ambit of what relationships with people of other races could be, because of the fact that socially there wasn't really access to them. And when that kind of changed for me when I started being a dance teacher, because then there were so many more people of so many more races, all wanting to dance, and you kind of in very close proximity. And you're kind of starting to realize that actually, in certain respects, we're really the same. Like, it doesn't matter what your skin color is. Some people have rhythm and some people struggle with rhythm. It really doesn't matter what your skin color is. And then it's like what Joreen said about, like, almost that energy of, in certain instances, you relate more to people of different races because of similar life experiences, because of of growing up with similar interests. Like, one of the things that always stood out for me was where people would say to me, "You're whiter than what we are." And I was like, what the fuck does that actually mean? And it's just that I grew up in a very metropolitan area. So it wasn't that energy of, for lack of better phrasing, that energy of rural tribalism that you find in more communities of color. Because the fact of the matter is we very much herd and tribe. And it's a very tribal mentality with communities of color. And so I grew up in a very metropolitan area where that was like, it was just not a thing. We just, like, everybody just intermingled. So, like, I have friends that are like, "You're whiter than what we are." And I'm like, what does that mean? Like, what do you actually mean? And it's those kind of things that you're talking to Drake, where people say things like that. And you could actually very comfortably and very easily take offense to something like that and allow it to stop you from living the fullness of you, as opposed to looking at it and going, well, what does that mean? Like, you've said it, so what does it mean? What are you actually trying to say here? And I think I've got to that point very early in my life. I'm like, that makes no sense. Like, it doesn't make sense. But when I feel back into it, it fuels feelings of kind of being on opposite sides of a road, or kind of that crap of you're on one railway platform and I'm on another railway platform, and there's these trains passing in the middle kind of shit. And, you know, like, that's just the sense I get when I feel into what racial separation really is.
You touched on that mindset that we learned from childhood, and Diana did the same at the beginning too. And I think it's really, really important to see that, yeah, it's something that is integrated and that we learn. Like, for example, I remember when I was in like middle school, without ever having discussed it, like sometimes some of the white people of the community would like just be together and stay together, like kind of isolate themselves from the Black and Indian and Native American people. Not all of them, but like most of them. And I remember like we were in like a middle school area where it was like private schooling, rich kids. And so there was that sense that because like they were like their parents were wealthy and they were white, there was that sense of like almost, yeah, it's like the natural state of things to just stay with people that are experiencing the same and can do the same things as us. And then it kind of like weren't true anymore when we went to high school, and we were more mixed, I guess. The groups were more fluid, and the same people wanted to integrate, so they learned like the regional languages, they hung out with us, and it felt good like that. But this illusion like didn't stay so much. But then like you also have that division from private schools compared to public universities. And so you get that division, but like on a national level this time. And it's like, oh, this is tiring. If people had that experience from middle school like we had, I think we would unlearn these patterns much quickly. And so I feel by healing that mindset right now, we are realizing that we are gifting the world a new kind of freedom. It was much more relaxing to not have these patterns from the get-go instead of having to unlearn them at a certain age. And yeah, I think like that thing with like the things that we learn from childhood is very important to unlearn right now and heal.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. Like, and I think it's something that we've kind of seen in some of the sermons coming through as well. Is just that those memories and feelings and experiences surface when it's time to heal them. And so you could very easily go for a large chunk of your adult life not remembering a certain thing. And then one day, and it seems random, but one day you just remember this thing and you're like, I used to enjoy that. Well, that happened. But what do I feel about it now? And I think it's the concept of when you're ready to heal something, your unconscious mind surfaces it. And that is why those things come up. And like, you know, I just, like today, I just like felt into a space where I was like, actually, I remember as a kid taking my mom's makeup and playing with it. And like, what? When did that happen? Kind of thing. You know, those kind of things kind of start to surface. And I was like, oh yeah, I did do that. And you know, it's just interesting that those kind of thoughts randomly crop up. And you look at it and you go like, oh, that's another piece of me that I kind of at some point allowed to leave. Or at some point allowed to go and sit in a dark corner. And so when you say it's a lot of the childhood stuff, I think that the conditioning is quite important to look into, because it's not like I don't recall ever not wanting to interact with people of other race groups. I just always remember being around people that were really very similar to me. And it wasn't, and if I feel back into it, it was part of my mother's decision to send me to a certain school where there were people like me. And it was part of my mother's decision to not grow up and not have a family living in one area, but in another area. So it's like almost counterintuitive energy of there's so much diversity where we live, but then we go to a school that's very catered to people of color, you know? And you're like, it's almost like it clashes. Like, what do you do with this as a child? Like, how do you make sense of your world when things like that actually happen? Because that's what we do as kids. We want to make sense of the world. We want to understand what's happening. And so some things we will just automatically incorporate. We'll just absorb it without asking questions. And some things we will ask questions about because they feel so different and so sometimes not even wrong. They just feel different. They just don't feel normal. And so there's always this testing in your environment, regardless of what your environment does. And so we start to socialize into spaces and things and places that make us feel like we can be more of ourselves as opposed to less of ourselves. And it's literally the energy of searching for acceptance as a child and believing that that acceptance is outside of you.
I think the two words that come to mind for me are compassion and surrender. A compassion for having grown up thinking that this that fueled for separation in so many places inside us was actually kind of a scheme to think we would be safe that way and think we would belong to a certain group that way and feel accepted. And also, like, there's that deep desire to surrender right now into something that is unknown to us, but that is actually our true self, and having that trust and faith in God that, yeah, we're just surrendering separation and that we're safe on the other side of the barrier.
Yeah, you know, the thing that kind of comes up for me is when you share it, it's like the core of it is a deep desire to be connected, a deep desire for connectedness. And like when I think into it and when I feel into it, it's just like, it's like at the core of most things, because of the way we're not created to be isolated or in isolation. And so the core desire is always going to be a connection. And so as we socialize, we find those components of separation that kind of almost interferes with our feeling of being connected to each other, being connected to life, being connected to God. Because, you know, I can very comfortably say there's been times in my life where I was like, well, if there's a God, why does he allow this kind of stuff? You know, and I'm not sure that other people may or may not have had that kind of thought process, but it does, you know, it's just that energy of, well, if God exists, how does God allow certain things? And then feeling back into the whole thing is, we are tribal people. We are meant to be in tribes. We do not do well in isolation. We are not cacti. You know, like a cactus can survive by itself in the desert for ages, and that's fine. Like, we are not that. Like, our intrinsic desire is to be connected. It's to be loved. It's to search for that connection of love. And so, like, all of these things that interfere with that connectedness is, for me, where the healing needs to take place. And sometimes it's just to actually go into that space to realize that actually that's just another one of, it's another illusion. It really is not real. It really just doesn't actually exist. But it also takes, it requires some courage. It requires courage to look at those places and be comfortable to find the uncomfortable feeling and to work through it.
Yeah, I really love that we're unpacking this, and like everything that's been said about safety has really resonated with me. Like separation kind of creating this false sense of safety, and kind of to Deji's point earlier, like I feel it's important to acknowledge that, you know, there are certain people who make certain choices, and like we are different, and we do relate more to certain people or certain groups because we all have different experiences, right? And our experiences make up a lot of our personality types, and that influences who we feel we relate to. And it's okay to acknowledge that. And I guess for me, the difference comes in recognizing that, like, it's okay to explore myself outside of that kind of box, I guess. And yeah, and then Granville, what you said about tribes, like that really stood out too, that we are tribal people, and we do like kind of move in tribes. And I guess like now that I'm really like kind of processing through it, those tribes don't have to be determined by race, right? Like color and all of that doesn't have to determine your tribe. But I feel like at such a young age, like we're separated by color, and then our experiences are determined by that initial separation, and then we just kind of gravitate to certain tribes that are determined by race. But our soul tribe could be all kinds of races. It could include all kinds of races. And so yeah, I really like that that was highlighted. And so it just feels good to kind of unpack this and kind of process through it.
Hello. So Granville brought up something that made me laugh because he was saying how like, oh, if God exists, why is this happening type thing. And it made me feel called to talk about Yogananda because she like talks about that, and it's like this specific part of the book, and it talks about like why God permits evil. And she just cracks me up because she said she'll even like argue with him and like that like God doesn't care. That she like argues with him because like she's getting like clarity. Oh my gosh, sorry. We got all these Apple things going off in this today. So yeah, she just basically said she had a conversation with God, and he explained that basically to see good is why that's why there's like evil in the world, because if it was like white on white, like you wouldn't see it, but like if it's like white on like a chalkboard of evil, then like you actually see the white and the good. And it was just like, yeah, I don't know why I felt called to share that, because I guess because Granville like said that question and it reminded me of that whole thing. But yeah, definitely. So I read that from it was The Divine Romance by Yogananda, and I remember the page. It was page 100. So in case you wanted to read it.
But I think that's brilliant that you shared that, because I think that's it's just the sense for me was just that I've been there. I've asked that question. I've sat in that space where that was a question in my mind. Is like, well, seriously, what the hell are you doing? Whether you're he or she, what are you doing? I was there. And so like, it's also that energy of actually just giving myself permission to admit that that was there and to say it. Just the freedom to go, well, that was a thing. It might not be a thing now, but it was a thing. And I did it. And I've worked through it. And actually, it's okay. And it's literally what you're saying in response is that it's okay to have these conversations with God. I think that's the thing that you sharing that brought up, is that it's okay to have these conversations with God. I think
I love that, because like it really is relieving just to like let it out and be like, yes, this is what I thought, and this is how I felt.
Yeah, and I think that, and like when I grew up, it was like always this thing about God works in mysterious ways, and I was like, well, who the hell are you hiding from? Like, people tell you these things, these idioms that you're supposed to live your life on. And you like look at it and you go like, well, what the hell is the purpose of that? And so when we start to learn how other spiritually minded and spiritually practiced and mastered people related to God, and you hear like, actually, I argue with God in these conversations. You're like, actually, I feel okay now. Like, it's okay. I'm not doing the wrong thing, And it settles your energy, and it's kind of freeing, and it allows for you to allow more of yourself.
Yeah,
I
I
love
love
that.
that because she literally says, God doesn't mind that I argue with him.
I love that too because like in Catholicism, probably like the whole of Christianity, um, people tell you to that one of the virtues of someone that has faith is to fear God, in the sense that you want to respect him, you want to do as he desires. But like there is a sense of like you can't talk to him like he's the closest person to you, which is wrong. And when as a kid you're taught that, and you swear, you say a swear word and you're like, oh, I'm sorry, God. Or like you discover your sexuality and you're like, it's just shame, shame, shame. Or yeah, you feel all these kinds of things. And then when I was maybe 17, I began to read these stories of saints all around the world. And it reminded me of like studying Yogananda and Rumi right now. And it's like, well, I bargained with God. Like, we made a pact. And if I do this, he does that. And I argue with God. And, I have this conversation, like a debate. And then I see his point of view, but I had a discussion with God, and I'm like, well, okay, that feels way better. I think, I think that's a part of like being divine too. It's knowing that you are allowed to be like a thinking being, a rational being that has the right to ask questions, and that's how God created you, and that's he created you to have this kinds of interaction with him first. That's super important. You don't have to get outside of him to have this. And it's such a gift, like to be yourself and, say swear words and discover yourself just in a relaxed way with the closest person to you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because I remember even in class, Jeff was like talking about some conversation he was having with God, and he was cussing and saying, expressing himself, and Shaleia said that God talks to you how you like to be talked to. So like, if you cuss, then he cusses with you, basically.
You know what I like about it is that as we're going into this, it's kind of just even more of the energy of acceptance in the space. Like it's more of the energy of individual acceptance, like just to, like, we talk countless times about, and we learn countless times from Jeff and Shaleia about how everything is always just a relationship with God. You are just having a relationship with God. And then you kind of learn something new, like God doesn't mind if you argue with him. And it's just like, that's like a whole new component to the relationship, and it feels like a more solid relationship and a more open relationship. And then you're like, okay, so this could be so much more fun than what I'm actually allowing it to be. And I think that's kind of been my greater realization here, and the greater awareness is that like this energy of censorship doesn't actually have to be there. Like the releasing the energy of censorship allows for the energy of acceptance. And that energy of acceptance allows us to heal more of the energy of separation.
So funny, it's like a singer that I liked made a song asking all these questions to God because it was like, I'm so tired of like not being allowed to do this or do that, and I don't want like a supreme being telling me that I'm not allowed to do this or do that. And someone responded to, actually, you are not allowing yourself to do this or do that. It's not God that. And it's funny because like even that is a beautiful realization of your relationship to the divine. Um, because as you go about expressing yourself freely and cursing and doing everything that you have to do, like to get it out, you start to have answers and realize that actually God did not like forbid you to do a certain thing. It's probably that you, because of your block or your education, did not permit yourself to do that in the first place. Yeah, I find it beautiful.
Yeah, I always think of this Twin Flames IRL video where Jeff and Shaleia were, I guess, calling each other dicks. They were just like, we had to express ourselves. It's all good, you know? I literally always think of that. I'm like, because like, it was just like, you know, they were having a good time, you know, it wasn't like anything serious. They weren't like being mean to each other, you know, but like they were just expressing themselves. So yeah, it's really cool. I agree with what you said, Granville, how this all like came down to deeper acceptance. Like even though we started off like talking about one thing and then, you know, it turned into like this like deeper communication with God and ourselves and just like expressing ourselves and accepting ourselves as who we are.
I like that ultimately the core healing was bigger than just talking about racial separation. It feels good to have expanded to that point.
So I just want to check in with you guys. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I really love the self-acceptance piece. Like, that's definitely been a huge sort of theme in my healing. Just learning to allow myself to be myself. And I realized like I had no idea who I was, and I'm still learning. And like what Yureen was saying about how it's never this supreme being or this authority figure that's not allowing you to do certain things. Like it's always you. And that's been a huge lesson for me. Like just Yeah, I'm the one who puts so many restrictions on myself. And I've been learning, like, I don't have to do that. And I think because I've been healing and because I've been getting to know myself more, allowing myself to feel my feelings, that's why like a lot around race has been coming up for me, because it's like, well, who am I as it relates to this group, or who am I as it relates to this group, or this feeling comes up, and what is that? So I'm like more prone to like actually allowing the feelings to come up and explore it. So kind of to everyone's point, like it just kind of weaves perfectly, which is really nice.
That feels complete to me. I don't know if everyone else has something that they want to add.
Yeah, I was just trying to like, just scanning into that feeling of, does it feel complete today? Like, is there more here today? And like, my sense is that it's just the tip of the iceberg. Like, I feel like there's actually something quite juicy underneath just that first surface layer of going deeper into self-acceptance, going deeper into acceptance. And yeah, so my feeling is that this is not a once-off topic. I kind of feel like it's a serial topic in this series. So I just also want to check with all of you how you feel about that.
Yeah, we could go on forever with this.
Yeah, so I feel like next week is part 2 of healing the core of racial separation. This feels very good directionally, but it also feels very good healing wise. So yeah, if any of you don't have anything further to add, I feel complete for today, but I don't feel like we are any means near the core of where we're wanting to go with this or needing to go with this just yet. Perfect. So I'm going to say thank you to everybody for the conversation today, and also to the people that have been following us and joining us. And if you're new to watching our conversation on why Black Lives Matter, please feel free to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, where you will find all our previous conversations that have taken place in our Unionism Spiritual Discussion group on Facebook. And we look forward to seeing all of you next week for another conversation. So thank you, everybody.